Good afternoon, everybody. What is going on? It is the Boomtown Pod, all things MMA. I'm your host, Andrew Kahn, and I am joined, as you can see on the screen here, by a very special guest. I'm going to get an intro into him right away, man. This is one of my broadcasting heroes, so I'm very excited to have him aboard for the show. Of course, this is the Boomtown Pod. You can find me at the Boomtown Pod on Twitter. Selfish plug. Our episode sponsors, of course, Stellar Gear. If you're looking for that clothing company, stellargear.ca. Use the /Boomtown10 to get all things 10% off. They have curbside delivery, of course, with the pandemic, which is going on. We are almost out of this weirdness. John's been able to see some crazy cool events, so I'm willing to get into this right away. But yeah, and then of course Sam Unboxing. Shout out to the crew over there, hooking us up with the Boomtown Pod swag. I'm pretty okay with it. Love those guys. Saskatoon, if you're in the area, make sure to go out and ask them about their programs. I've got some good friends that have lost over 100 pounds on their programs, so very cool stuff. Make sure to check them out. But like I said, welcome John Morgan. This is awesome for me, man. Like I said, I've been a fan of yours for a very long time, of course, with MMA Junkie. You can find him at MMA Junkie. John, what's going on, man?
Not much, man. Appreciate you having me, and appreciate the kind words, man. It's I think it's just I've been doing this so damn long. I forget that people have kind of grown up in the space, seeing my face out there. So it's kind of wild to think about that. But I appreciate those kind words, man.
Man, I was sitting there the other day and I was like, who is the one guy that I could bring onto this podcast that just like exemplifies from our standpoint as analysts and fans who gets to do this every single event? I mean, you're the face.
That's awesome, man. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I feel fortunate, man. It's the old cliche, when you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. But it's true, man. I got super fortunate. Right time, right place, and I mean, obviously, I'll have to take some credit for my own hard work and effort and all that stuff. But I just do feel incredibly fortunate to have kind of fallen into the role that I'm in. And yeah, man, I get, very few people I think really get to live in a space that they're so passionate about, and I get that great fortune, man. So I never forget how lucky I am.
Yeah, I think it's like for myself too. I mean, I live out, like we were talking about before the pod, I live out in Saskatchewan, where it's not, I mean, MMA has become more mainstream than it has, I would say, over the last several years than ever. And there just wasn't a market where a guy like myself could, use that input and talk about it and actually, be that source. I mean, in Canada, you think Ariel Helwani. I mean, that's pretty much the name and face out here, as well as James Lynch. So I was like, well, there's really an aspect for me to take advantage of this. So, I mean, I learned from a lot from what you were able to do with your career, and I emulated a few things, and I really took that into stride. So again, man, this is an absolute honor to have you on the show. And I kind of want to get into it. Speaking of MMA, why did you choose to cover MMA for a living, and when did you really fall in love with the sport?
Yeah, no, listen, I was passionate about MMA very, very early on. I mean, the first UFC I ever attended was UFC 16, if you can imagine that, back when I was, 20 years old. So it was something that I loved quite a bit, but it wasn't necessarily something that I thought could be a job. I did very early on in my life want to be a sports writer. Once I kind of realized that, I played soccer, baseball, basketball growing up and enjoyed playing sports, but realized, okay, look, I'm not going to be a professional athlete. So how else could I still be involved in sports? And I liked writing. I enjoyed writing. And so I wanted to be a sports writer. But I never married the two ideas together because in the beginning, it wasn't the industry that we have now. I mean, mixed martial arts was just this fringe kind of freak show thing that was going on out there that I happen to love and be passionate about. Basically, the MMA passion started because when I was a kid, I grew up, I like professional wrestling, I like Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Savage, all that good stuff.
Over-the-top personalities.
That's Saturday night's main event back in the day. But then I was about 8 or 9 years old and figured out it wasn't real. And I was like, well, damn it. This is what I loved. And now it's fake. What do I do? And when I was about 12, just chance encounter, friend of a friend got us invited to a gym opening in Dallas where I was born and raised. It was Guy Mesger. He was actually opening a gym in Dallas and attended that. And he had on a tape of Muay Thai from Thailand, and it was playing on a VHS tape. And I was watching that, and I'm like, oh my God, like this is what a real fight looks like. Like this is unbelievable, and so through Guy Mesger, that kind of ignited this passion in combat sports, and I started following his career and Pancrase and UFC and everything that was going on at the time. And so really just got into it and just haven't looked back, man. It's my favorite sport, no question about it. And then ultimately I was able to kind of marry those two ideas together, being a sports writer, which now nobody's just a sports writer. Now you got to do a podcast, you got to do video, you got to do graphic design, you got to do all of it. But yeah, so that's kind of how the whole story went.
That's sweet, man. I mean, I think I was probably, wow, going back into it, I think I was about 15 years old, and I think it was the first time I ever saw Anderson Silva fight. That's when I totally fell head over heels for the sport. I think it was against James Sandman Irvin, where he caught his leg, hit him with that right, and I was like, "Yep, well, you've sold me on this sport." I mean, and Tim Sylvia too. Back in the day, I mean, you grew up in the country and you hear these big country guys, and Tim Sylvia was this big powerhouse beast who didn't really have a ton of like. I wouldn't say he had a ton of skill, but he was just all meat and all power, and he just threw bombs, and you're like, I can get into this. And then, of course, my parents raised me on the Gracie Academy and all those guys with no weight classes. Back in the day, UFC 1, I got the VHSs, and some people who are watching this podcast right now are probably like, the hell's a VHS? I mean, that's the sad reality that we live in. But, I mean, it is true. The different weight classes and stuff like that, and I think the sport picked up so much steam, I would say really – maybe the early 2000s. I think it really came to fruition at that point where Dana White was like, hey, I got more realm, I've got more hold on this, and I can definitely make this a sellable product. And then of course the Fertitta brothers and Sean Shelby and everybody that's involved in that organization did a tremendous job building it to where it is today. So I mean, for you and I, we're lucky because this sport just keeps evolving. And to be frank, it was the one sport that didn't shut down during the pandemic.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing, to be honest with you, man. I mean, I know, geez, I was worried about how I was going to pay the bills and what the future was going to be, as the world started to shut down. It's crazy how fast it happened. And yeah, I mean, look, we at Gannett, which is the parent company of MMA Junkie and USA Today Sports, I mean, we had to deal with furloughs and reduce salary structures and all that stuff. And, some of the sports that were off longer, I mean, they had to, people lost their jobs in this industry, as journalists, because there was nothing to cover. And so it was pretty amazing to come back. And it was pretty wild because, it was really covering a part of history. I mean, we were the center of the sporting universe. I remember, those first couple of events in Jacksonville doing so many like mainstream radio interviews and stuff that I, more so than I'd probably done around anything other than like Conor and Floyd, and it was interesting talking to some of these radio hosts before I'd go on air, and they'd straight up admit, and I appreciate their honesty, while we were off air, they'd just say, listen, to be honest with you, I don't know a whole lot about this sport, but there's just no other sport to cover right now. So we want to. And I was like, hey, don't worry, I'll walk you through it. We'll educate you. And that's no problem at all. But it really was such a blessing. I know it was, deemed controversial at times, but man, I can tell you, man, the UFC, man, they did everything they could to keep it as safe as possible. They did not cut any corners. They did not do anything unsafely. I mean, they spent a ton of money and put a ton of effort into doing it right. And yeah, I do feel fortunate. I know it's easy to sit back and pick on the UFC. It's sometimes it seems like it's the vogue thing to do is to criticize the UFC and tell what a bad organization they are and this sort of thing. But you talk about, as you said, growing the entire industry. This sport wouldn't exist if it wasn't for what the UFC did through all those developmental times. And once again, I mean, they led the way in coming back during this COVID crisis. So they honestly deserve a lot of credit.
I think the way they handled it was with complete class. I mean, there's been people who obviously ridiculed Dana White right off the get-go. Well, you're having an event, even though there's no fans, and how are you going to make money and all this? I mean, to be honest, I think he did everything the right way. And I mean, he gets criticized a lot for the dumb stuff that he's done throughout his life, but he should be recognized for a lot of the good stuff that the man has done as well.
Hey, put it like this: when I get done with this, I've got to leave my house right now and go get a COVID test because the media day is tomorrow. It will be the 102nd time I've been given a COVID test by the UFC. So I mean, that just goes to show you the level of monitoring that they've had all along the path of this, and that they continue to have.
Do they know you at a first name basis? It's like when you go to your local your local Dunkin' and you're like, yeah, I'll get that. And they're like, John, how you doing? Is that like the COVID facility there?
Yeah, the paramedics are far too familiar with my nasal passages, if I'm being honest with you, man.
They just know you inside and out. I absolutely love it. I mean, I'm glad that, and I'm fortunate because, again, when it comes to the media aspect of things, I didn't know how things were going to be handled. So when you hear, like, your voice and that stuff there, and you're like, okay, at least this man's still working. He's still got a job, which, again, during all of this, you and I have been talking about. Very grateful that we both have positions where we've been able to talk to the fighters. I mean, I had Max Griffin on the show a couple of weeks ago, and he was just like, yo, man, the amount of stuff that I have to do for fight week is just insane. So, I mean, that was a pretty eye-opening. And from our side of things, have they had you like do your own isolation rooms, or like how did they handle this when you're doing the different events, even now with fans in the stands?
Yeah, it's been different along the way because obviously as things have loosened up a little bit. But, you talk about like Fight Island, like that was just intense. That was to a different level where like, people are greeting us in like full hazmat gear as we arrived to Abu Dhabi and like spraying down our bags with sanitizer and whatever else. So I mean, it's been different, but yeah, starting in Florida, they asked us to please quarantine, please stay in your room, other than for the media activities. They've changed the way everything is set up to where, we used to kind of just scrum around to talk to a fighter. Now there's individual tables that are all spaced out 6 feet apart. We don't pass around a microphone. There's hardwired microphones, so you don't have to share that. I mean, so everything has really been thought of in terms of keeping us apart. We actually just now we're able to start taking masks off at the UFC Apex. You'll notice now that you'll see us without wearing masks. So that's just been new within the last couple of weeks. So, it's been from the very, very extreme to now we're starting to loosen up a little bit. But even now, like I said, we're still testing twice a week. If you want to go to all the media activities, we are asked to basically, we're allowed to stay in our home if we're Vegas locals. If you're traveling, you have to stay at the host hotel. But as locals, we're able to go home. But they do say, hey, please follow the CDC guidelines and please stay in your house, once you've been tested, so that you don't screw up the validity of this test and that sort of thing. So it's been a very intricate process along the way.
For an analyst, it's like getting a USADA test. I mean, essentially, you got to make sure you're good to go. But yeah, man. So that kind of breaks me into the next one. I want to talk about this because obviously, if whoever, maybe some people in Canada don't know who you are, maybe you're not a household name here, but again, in my life, you have been, John. You were named MMA Analyst of the Year. Now, that's a very prestigious honor. Obviously, there's quite a length of names that go through the MMA world. So when you got announced that you were the winner, how did that feel for you, man?
It's pretty cool, man. I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty cool, to be recognized like that. And I love the World MMA Awards, man. I love what they do. It's such a great event. Fortunately, with COVID, we haven't been able to have it lately, but it's so fun. Everybody puts on their suits and gets dressed up, and we go, all kind of hang out together, and you see each other in a different light. And so to be recognized there was a pretty cool moment, and I definitely take some pride in that. I take even more pride. I'll be honest with you. I take even more pride when MMA Junkie gets Media Source of the Year. It's kind of like winning the MVP versus winning the Super Bowl. I'd rather win the Super Bowl than the MVP. So I take more pride in those years that we've been able to win Media Source of the Year. So, but yeah, it's very cool to be recognized. It really is.
Well, you guys crush it with content. I mean, 500. I was actually just checking before I came on here. 555,000 followers on your Twitter account. I mean, that's just a couple. I mean, that's just a few people, but I mean, that's awesome, man. MMA Junkie has been a source for me, even like I said, throughout the years when I was growing up through Facebook and stuff like that. You guys were the sole constant provider for MMA news, so it's always been nice. And now actually getting to meet you virtually, I guess. I can't wait till I'm able to do this in person with you. Even cooler. But we got a fan question for you, and it does ask. Literally every time I'm watching these things, I'm like, this is actually a really great question. It came from our friend Steve, and he goes, how are you always the first guy to get in for questioning pre-fight and post-fight with the fighters?
Yeah, listen, I mean, that's been something that's been happening for a while. I mean, used to, it was just, I'm always the first one there. I show up first. I'm the first one to get there. I'm the last one to leave usually. So it's, I've always thought that was, the right thing to do is to get there early and to get set up and make sure all your gear is good and all that. And it just kind of started that way. And it's just kind of become tradition. It's funny. Dave Schaller, who now works for the Philadelphia 76ers. A lot of people might know him if you're a hardcore MMA fan, is the guy that was trapped between John Jones and Daniel Cormier during that infamous shoving thing. But he's a former PR director of the UFC. But it's kind of funny. We would have these press conferences, and Dana White would come out to the press conference and be like, who's got the first question? And, we would all stick our hands in the air, and then you have a PR rep come and like bring a microphone to you. But if you're in an arena, it's kind of hard to get to certain seats. So it just kind of became like these awkward pauses where he's waiting for the first question. And there were actually even a couple times where he's like, what, nobody has a question today? And it's like, no, we do. We're just trying to wait for the microphone. So Schaller one day just asked me, he was like, hey man, like, I know you got questions to ask. He's like, do you mind if we just start the press conference with a microphone in your hand? That way when he goes, like, we don't have to wait. We can just go. And I was like, yeah, that works, man. That makes sense. We don't have that awkward pause. And so that just kind of happened. And then it just kind of became routine. And now it's just kind of, expected. And to the point that even Dana kind of shows up and goes, John Morgan, where you at or whatever. So it's kind of become, it really just started out as something simple and mechanical. And now it's become kind of funny, actually.
Well, that answers that perfectly. I mean, that's awesome. Just getting into the event. And again, I think a lot of people will notice that your work ethic is unparalleled. I mean, it really is. I mean, you watch the fights, and obviously you're the first guy, like I said, in there. You're the last guy to leave. I mean, that's pretty awesome. And it motivates a guy like me to get that passion, that hunger, especially when you're, like I said to you earlier, it's such a smaller market, right? For me to try to climb up the rankings, and especially. So, I mean, just got to keep putting in that work. So that's an awesome fan question. So let's get into it. UFC 263, we talked about having fans in the stands. You were obviously right there for it. Izzy versus Vettori. I mean, it kind of went the way I thought it was going to go, for the lack of better terminology, I guess. But when I thought about it after, and I thought about that Whittaker rematch and how Whittaker's got himself there, do you think Whittaker is a guy to dethrone Stylebender if there was a guy in that division?
I think he can be. I think he can be. I think he's got all the tools. He's got the mental strength. He's got the technique. He's got everything he needs to do it. It's going to be tough. That Israel Adesanya that fought the other night was dialed back in again. I mean, the Jan Blachowicz performance was just such a flat performance. I didn't really understand it exactly, kind of what was going on, but it, just kind of made me think, where's Adesanya at this point in his career? Is maybe that drive or that passion, is it kind of fading a little bit, or is he starting to feel the superstar status a little bit too much? What's going on here? He just didn't seem as engaged and turned on as he had in the past, and that kind of went away. And listen, it could be as simple as the fans in the stands type thing. I mean, I know that sounds like a crazy thing. I mean, when you talk about all the training that's involved in a mixed martial arts contest and the preparation that goes involved in, and then you say, what, the difference was the fans? But it's insane. Like the atmosphere that's in there and what it does to a person, and the adrenaline level and the focus and all those things. It's two totally different things. That UFC Apex, I mean, God bless that we had it and that we were able to hold events, man. I mean, how great did that work out for the UFC that facility was there? But it feels flat in there, man. You go in there and it's, we never complained about it. And we kind of, noticed the positives of like, oh, you can hear the coaches now. And, oh, you can hear the sound of the blows. And it was different, it was a different viewing experience. But for the fighters, it kind of feels like you're walking into a practice or a sparring session or something like that. Whereas when you walk into that arena with, 15, 16, 17,000 fans going nuts and the bright lights and all that, man, it flips a switch in you in terms of your readiness and your focus and kind of your, like I said, your mental state. So whatever it is, though, I thought the performance the other night from Adesanya was solid. I did think Vettori, kind of came up a little bit flat. I would like to see a little bit more dynamic approach from him than what we saw, but Adesanya is just a tough riddle to figure out. But I do think Robert Whittaker has all the tools to do it. Can he do it? We'll see. I mean, talking about all those kind of variables as well. I mean, Robert Whittaker got into a point where it's clear he was kind of burned out by the sport and didn't really enjoy it. And I think that joy for him is back, and he's kind of having fun with it again. So I sure as hell look forward to that fight. It's a shame. It's the chances of it happening down under, whether it be Australia, whether it be New Zealand, seem pretty slim. They're still pretty tight on how they're handling, quarantines and travel and all that right now. So I know Adesanya threw it out there that he'd love to do it in Auckland, but I don't think, talking to people that are from there, I think they're all like, yeah, that ain't gonna happen.
It's going to happen in Vegas.
It's going to happen in Vegas.
It's probably going to happen.
Or the return to Abu Dhabi. That's where I think it might happen. I think they are going to go back to Abu Dhabi this year. It won't be, the Fight Island bubble, so to speak, but I think they'll probably be in Abu Dhabi around October. I think it could happen there.
I mean, I think that's the fight to make in that division. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Whittaker single-handedly just destroyed Kelvin Gastelum. I mean, it wasn't even, pretty. I mean, that was a dominant performance. And Kelvin Gastelum's he's a tough dude too, man. He took a licking and kept going the whole time. Like, I mean, that says something about Kelvin Gastelum, who's got a ton of heart as a fighter too, and I think that showed in that fight. But, I mean, I think Vettori came out a really, really flat. And I was really watching the press conference and watching all of it. And I mean, you were there firsthand. It seemed Marvin was on another level, man. Like he was amped and jacked. But this is the head game that Izzy plays with every single one of his fighters, and it worked again.
Yeah, that press conference was something special, man. It was unbelievable. And it's one of the things I love about Marvin Vettori is he is just the hottest headed dude you've ever met in your life, man. He just flips over nothing, and he flipped that day for sure. But you're right. Adesanya, when he's on point, he's playing the mind games, and it's something like a guy like Conor McGregor used to be able to do, to just really manipulate his opponents in a way that played to his advantage, because they fought emotionally. They had bigger adrenaline dumps. They took risks that they shouldn't have taken, all because they were upset. He was in their head from the start. And, I think that definitely happened here with Marvin Vettori as well. It's a shame. I like Marvin a lot, man. He's a good dude. I don't know if he'll get another shot at Adesanya, so he might need a change in hands of the title before he gets another shot at it.
Yeah, I thought the same thing too. Just, some guys get that one chance, and Marvin might be that Dan Hardy in the welterweight division where you go on a bit of a run back in the day, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, there's that, right? So that those guys will never get a chance. I'm hoping he does. I mean, Vittori's a fun fighter. I hope his wrestling comes a little bit farther. I mean, he did take Izzy down a couple times, and I was like, okay, here we go. He put that rear naked choke on, and I was like, okay, all right, there's something from you. And then it was just flat on the feet. And then Izzy just started picking him apart. But I agree with you on that Jan Blachowicz fight. I mean, I feel like Izzy didn't take it as seriously as Jan did. And Jan literally said, well, you're this up and coming prospect who's supposed to be the best of the best right now in the UFC. I just became champion. So, and I think the weight differential was massive. I mean, obviously, Izzy going to the fight at, 192 and a box of pizza, and you're just like, yeah, I don't think your head's going against a warrior over there who's probably going to walk into the octagon at 225.
Yeah, the size difference definitely played a factor in there. I mean, look, had Adesanya been a little bit more dynamic in his approach and his movement and all the things that we thought we'd see, I think he could have done it, but it was a tall order for him. And, listen, I think Adesanya knew it was a tall order. I think maybe the general public or a lot of the fan base didn't, because they looked at Jan Blachowicz and didn't really have that respect for him as a champion that maybe they should have. And that's understandable. I mean, that's the problem with, anytime a champion leaves a division and vacates a belt. That's why you never want somebody vacating a belt, because no matter what happens next, there's question marks around that champion as, oh, well, you didn't actually, the only reason you're here is because that guy left and that sort of thing. I think there was a lot of that hanging around Jan Blachowicz, but listen, he deserves some respect. He's a tough character, and he's got another great fight coming up as well later this year.
Oh, I'm excited for that fight. Anyways, we're getting excited for UFC 264 because that's taking place. You're talking about COVID testing. You're getting your butt down there at AT&T Mobile Arena. I am jealous that you get to be there for this. Notorious and Diamond Part 3, of course, splitting 1-1, two different weight divisions on both fights for the winners, 145. And then we had, I believe it was 155. So now we're back at 155. From what I have seen from both of their preparation and camps, I'm geared up. I'm excited for the fight because I don't think it's going to be like the last one at all. I think this is going to be a slugfest for a while. But something just tells me I think Conor Mack sells seats. We all know that. He is notorious. He brings asses in the seats. He is one of the best company guys that they've ever had in the business. But there is just something underrated about Dustin Poirier, man. And I just don't think he gets the respect in this fight. But I say that, and betting odds have officially came in for the first time in Conor McGregor's career. He is the underdog in betting. So this is exciting to see, which is truly weird to see, actually, to be honest with you. But what do you think of this matchup?
It's a big one for Conor McGregor. Listen, he is a global superstar. He's the biggest star in the history of the sport. There's no question about it, but he's got to win fights to stay relevant. You know what I mean? And this is a big one for him. And it's tough. I mean, it's a quick turnaround from a fight that you just lost. And Conor did show some things in there. I mean, he did land, he had some shots and Dustin was quick to say, man, that dude hits hard, and if he right catches him, he's in trouble. He knew right away. This time we're actually seeing a Conor McGregor who's stayed in fight camp and who's continued to prepare, who has eliminated a lot of the distractions and stuff around him, was kind of pared down. He's not traveling with the big entourage. Now he's kind of pared it down to just John and Owen, is from my understanding, and kind of taking a little more Spartan approach to things. And if it's him getting back to who he was, I mean, that could be, but listen, and Dustin said it himself, that aura around Conor McGregor is gone. I mean, he's still a great fighter, no question about it. But, there used to be that something where it's like, you thought there was something otherworldly about him that's just like, oh, this dude's something, he's got something in his corner that you just can't beat. Now, you don't see it that way. You just see it as a guy who is good movement and a big left hand, and you got to watch out for that. So, listen, I lean towards Dustin as well. I think I'll be picking him again in the trilogy fight. But listen, Conor McGregor shines brightest on the biggest stages, and having a full house in there. You talk about a guy that feeds off that energy from the crowd, and there is nothing like the energy of a Conor McGregor crowd. I'm afraid Ireland won't be traveling as well as it normally does, just because the quarantine restrictions and things that they would have back in place probably limit the amount of people that are able to come over as they've done in the past. So I think the atmosphere might be a little bit different, but not terribly. I mean, Conor McGregor incites, excitement in any fan. So I think it's going to be a pretty electric atmosphere.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this matchup. I think there's been a lot of animosity, obviously, I think this all started when Conor decided to, talk about giving money to the the Poirier Foundation there, and then he didn't do it, and then Dustin went off and was pretty upset about it because he's like, well, a gentleman's bet's a gentleman's bet, right? Like that was a stipulation, and you thought Conor was this good guy, and then all of a sudden we had this verbal exchange on Twitter for probably a better part of a month, and then all of a sudden it was like, all right, it's official, they're gonna do this thing. So I mean, I thought it's a quick turnaround for both guys essentially in the fight game. It's a pretty fast moving card, I guess. But I agree with you, and I side with you. I think Dustin's power, especially because he's been so consistent at 155. And he's always been there. You know what I mean? Like that 145 fight, we saw Dustin really get rattled. And I don't think he's that guy anymore. Conor was under his skin like a tick. And it just made him boil, you know? And like Dustin will be the first guy to tell you, he's like, he did everything right to get under my skin. He pissed me off to the next extreme level. I was upset. He was in my head. I wasn't the same fighter. And clearly, since that loss, look what Dustin has done with his career. So, I mean, it's crazy to see the resurgence of Diamond, but I think he pulls this off. Conor's left hand, like you said, man, when he hits you, and Dustin said in that post fight, it hurt. It hurt a lot. So, and he stunned him. Let's not forget that he did have Dustin rocked at a certain point. So, I mean, I do think Notorious gets that clean left hand like he can, and he's got the capability of doing so and lands perfectly. I mean, this is one of those hard fights again to predict, but I did roll with Diamond last time. I'm going to roll with him again just because I think this is a good fight for him, and he stays at 155 where he's just been training for years now. So going into the co-main event, we've got, of course, Gilbert Burns coming off a loss to Kamaru Usman. We got Stephen Thompson coming off of his latest win in the welterweight co-main. This is a title contender, I think, for all intents and purposes. Today, Gilbert Burns said, if I lose, I'm pretty much screwed when it comes to taking another championship fight. And for Wonderboy, I mean, this is probably the last kick at the can. I mean, Wonderboy's 36 years old. He's not getting any younger. And this welterweight division, besides these two and Chaos Colby Covington, is pretty wide open. So I think this is the title contender, right?
I think so, especially for Wonderboy. You know, for Gilbert Burns, I don't know if it's necessarily a number one contender fight, but it makes sure that he stays right there so he can be in a number one contender fight. I think if Wonderboy wins, especially impressively, Kamaru Usman will probably say, hey, that's the guy I want to fight next. You know, that's the guy that deserves it. He's already said, you know, that he thinks this guy is the most deserving that. And to be honest, I just don't think he wants to give Colby Covington that shine. You know, I don't think Usman wants to go back through and deal with Colby again. So we'll see how it all plays out. I mean, I've certainly got Leon Edwards in there who believes that he deserves that title shot as well. So I do think for Wonderboy, at least, this is a number one contender fight. And stylistically, it's an intriguing clash. It's a very, very important fight at 170 pounds.
It's a very weird fight too. I mean, both styles are very, very different. I mean, anytime Wonderboy steps in the ring, it's a different fight, right? So, yep. And I agree with you fully. I think in a weird term with the kids using that smoke, I just don't think that Usman wants that Colby Chaos Covington smoke again. I mean, it was a great fight, and it could have went either way throughout the entire fight. I mean, and you were there to watch it live. You totally understand the dynamics of that fight. That thing was crazy nuts. I mean, and Kimura, again, proving that his power once again held firm against Colby, who kind of strayed away from his wrestling, which we all know Chaos will do, or push you against the fence and really, really wind you down. But yeah, nonetheless, I don't know if I'm a matchmaker. I really think the next fight should be Leon Edwards and Colby Covington. I just from what I see, but I know that Leon Edwards doesn't want that fight. Now he's talking about fighting Jorge Masvidal, and I'm like, that seems like a step in the back direction. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't that could have happened years ago when you guys had the 3-piece and soda comment. I mean, that should have happened way back then. That's almost 2-3 years ago. And now I'm like, I don't know if that intriguing matchup's there for me. Do you think that Leon should fight Chaos, or should he fight Jorge?
I mean, honestly, from a storyline perspective and fan interest, I mean, fighting Masvidal is the bigger fight in terms of, you know, what people are going to get excited for. In terms of fighting Covington, I mean, there's no denying if you beat Covington, you're the clear number one contender. And I do think Covington's the toughest matchup for Usman stylistically as well. So, but if you're talking about sheer fan interest and numbers and trying to get the rub, which I think is what Leon Edwards needs. I mean, he seems to be the unheralded kind of guy of the division, you know, the one that has the least fan base out of any of those names that we're talking about. So if you beat a guy like Masvidal, and of course there's going to be a ton of build up, you know, they're going to play all that footage that happened and it'll feel like it's fresh again. You know what I mean? So, you know, honestly, it's interesting because there's pros and cons to both. I think if you beat Covington, it's the clear number one contender fight. But if you're looking for, you know, career longevity and you know, guaranteeing yourself and growing some fan base and that sort of thing, I think the Masvidal fight's the one to take.
I agree with you fully. Moving on to the next fight, we got Hardy, our boy, who moved over from, of course, the NFL, Greg Hardy over, and taking on Tai Tuivasa, who is coming off of a absolutely unbelievable performance on that knockout, man. That was the old Tuivasa that everybody has been clamoring for and wanted so bad to finally made his return. And this is an intriguing matchup in the heavyweight division. I mean, you look at what's going to be happening this weekend, and we'll talk about that in a couple seconds. But how do you see this fight playing out? I think this is a Tuivasa fight.
Yeah, I think Tuivasa is the favorite in terms of technique and just understanding of the game. Hardy's still a relative neophyte. He's getting better, but Hardy is huge. I mean, he is massive. He is going to tower over Tuivasa in terms of size, and if he clips you, it's problematic. Neither one of them necessarily has the greatest cardio of all time. So the later it goes, the more kind of sloppy it could get, and Hardy could certainly land something. So I would favor Tuivasa in this fight ever so slightly, but I certainly wouldn't count Hardy out of here. I know a lot of people aren't the biggest fans of Hardy as a human being, but if you deny his athletic tools, you're just being a fool, to be honest with you.
It's insane how powerful he is. Like, it really is. Like, if you think about athletes who have ever, like, especially going from an NFL defensive end where you're, just sacking quarterbacks for a living, and he always talks about it, right? Being that two-sport athlete, now moving over to the UFC, he's got a ton of power, man, and that weight doesn't leave. And he's quick.
I don't think people realize, like, until you're around it and you see it up close, like that's when you realize, oh, that's what an NFL caliber athlete is. Like, this is on a different, it's on a different level. The amount of size and speed and power together, it's unbelievable.
Yeah, he's pretty quick. I think, like, after I watched a couple more fights now, like, I'm a diehard Dallas Cowboy fan, so I'm obviously quite aware of Greg Hardy in the defense and being a Pro Bowler of caliber of sorts, and having them watching him over the last couple of fights now. I think we're about 4 fights deep now into his UFC career, and I'm like, each time I watch him, I'm getting more impressed with his explosiveness, his cardio first and foremost, because I mean, I didn't know if he was going to be able to last even 5 minutes in that octagon, especially how explosive he is, right? We saw it on the Contender Series where he knocked that guy out. It was nuts and it was quick, but I was like, I want to see him against top opponents. So I really think this is going to be a very career-defining moment for Greg Hardy if he can pull this off against Tuivasa, who's coming off, again, an absolutely phenomenal knockout finish. So I am looking forward to this one in the heavyweight division. And then we go to the Sugar Sean show. Louis Smoka, this is a bantamweight. Oh, man, this fight's going to be explosive. I'm just excited. When they announced this, I was like, finally. I know Sugar Sean has been asking for this fight for a very long time. Louis Smoka's like, all right, man, let's do this. Sugar Sean coming off a massive knockout. And then, of course, the whole leg injury that he had before with Chito Vera, who just continues to roll. Louis Smoka, man, is a different caliber. He's nuts, too. So this is going to be an explosive fight in the bantamweight division. How do you see this one playing out, John?
Yeah, I mean, I favor O'Malley here. I do, and I like Louis Smoka a lot. And he's done a lot of things to change his career path, including sobriety and that sort of thing, and really seen the difference. And he's an absolute gamer out there. He's a dog, so he's going to test O'Malley. But I just feel like O'Malley's a little bit higher tier of athlete, so I would favor O'Malley in this fight. But it's no gimme by any stretch. Smoka can make you pay for mistakes.
We watched a tremendous performance by Sugar Sean in his last fight, obviously last go around, where he was just. He's so good at picking you apart. I mean, he's so quick in that bantamweight division. Now, obviously, we saw a war between Cody Garbrandt and Rob Font. Now, do you think the fight to make, I'm just throwing this out there, there's been a lot of back and forth between Cody Garbrandt and Sugar Sean. If Sugar wins this, do you make that matchup with Cody?
I would. I like it. I think it would sell. I think it would get fan interest. You can headline a card with it.
For sure.
And I definitely think that people would be excited about that one. It's another step up for Sean O'Malley to continue kind of his career development. So yeah, I like that fight if he's able to get by here.
100%. As we said, this weekend we got a big fight night coming up. We got Cyril versus Alex Volkov. This is one of my favorite matchups right now in the heavyweight division. Both guys just beasting. Cyril just beating, of course, Rosenstruck, and Volkov coming off a domination performance of one Alistair Overeem, who is now done with the UFC. Volkov, to me, looks like he continuously gets better every single fight. Now, this guy's a legitimate problem in the heavyweight division. Do you see him pulling off the win here?
Listen, I like Cyril Gane in this fight, but I think it's another big test for him. It's a big moment for him. Alexander Volkov is a guy that has struggled to break through to get to the elite. He's kind of gotten up to those big fights, and he's come up short against the very best in the division, but he's a legitimate test, and his size is problematic for anybody. Now, Gon's a pretty big dude as it is as well, so I think he'll be able to deal with it well, and I think he's a little bit quicker. I think he's a little bit more dynamic in the way he moves. So I like Gon in this fight, but Volkov, especially Volkov in a small cage, it's going to be a test for him because there's not going to be a lot of room to move in there.
Ciryl Gane, I thought, had a really, I don't want to say lackluster performance against Rosenstruck. He just did his thing to win. Like he didn't really go out of his element to show that he was, he's a very highly touted prospect. Everybody knows about already, but it just more so was putting Rosenstruck against the clinch. And obviously Rosenstruck has that knockout power, and we've seen it already. Again, he's just so quick and dynamic. But I mean, I want to see him throw a lot more leg kicks. I want to see him be that kickboxer. Do you think he's got the explosive factor to pull this off?
Yeah, I think here he does as well. Rosenstruck is an entirely different fighter, and I think he fought a smart fight there, and it's not necessarily the most exciting to everybody. But we've seen what happens, when you make one mistake against Jairzinho. So I think he fought a smart fight, and obviously it's early in his career, man. He's still developing as well. So the more time he can get in there, the better. I thought it was a good fight, and I think he'll impress people in this one.
You're heading over there to watch that one, hey?
Always, just 15 minutes from my house, man. It's not too bad. It's been the Apex has been a godsend to the UFC, and it hasn't been too bad. I've gotten to spend a lot of time at home. Not that I would like to go through this pandemic thing again, but I've gotten to spend a lot more time at home than I have in previous years. So it hasn't been too bad.
That's pretty awesome, man. I know you're talking about your kid's soccer camp not too long ago. So how did that go?
It was great, man. It was his first exposure to soccer, and we'd wanted to get him started last year, but obviously COVID kind of changed everything. So did a soccer camp, and he had a blast, and we'll get him on his first team this fall. And it's fun seeing the little dude grow up, man.
Well, John, this is an absolute privilege, man. I like I said, I looked up to you for many years, so this is really cool to have this one-on-one with you. And I just want to, shameless plug. Where can folks find you, man?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I appreciate having me. At MMA Junkie John on Twitter, John Morgan MMA on Instagram. I'm not the most active dude on social media, but you can definitely reach me there. You can also check out the podcast, the MMA Roadshow with John Morgan. You can find that everywhere. And if you want to support the podcast, you can head over to patreon.com/the MMA Roadshow and support us there. So we've been putting that out every week for over 5 years now. So check that out.
What are we at now? 340 some episodes?
Somewhere around there, man, like 330 or something. It's crazy, man. Consecutive weeks, by the way, too. Never missed a week. Have never missed one single week.
That is impressive. Like, I put out 23 of them. I'm like, that's a good year. You've never missed a week. So, I mean, if you guys really want some great content, I mean, you guys are absolutely amazing on the MMA Roadshow. Their podcast is phenomenal. I've been listening to it since day one. So make sure to go do so. John, man, thank you so much for this, dude. This was definitely a privilege and an honor. And we'll have to have you on here sometime. And hopefully I can get out there and actually enjoy Fight Card with you, man.
Yeah, hopefully restrictions get all out of the way and you can come do that, man. But I appreciate you having me.
Appreciate it.